Hey everybody, thanks a lot for having me here. I'm going to do a slightly longer talk tonight. I have the distinct advantage of having the clicker in my hand. I have done the typical Disrupt HR format where the slides just change on you, and props to everybody up here who's done it tonight and everybody who will do it. It's incredibly challenging, and I feel your pain. So we're going to talk about HR tech. The robots are coming. I live in Boston, so I got to give a shout out to Paul Revere here. I basically want to talk about like what is going on in this landscape. Should we be afraid? Are we all going to be unemployed in 6 months? The world of HR tech is really complicated. There's lots of people selling us stuff and trying to lead us in one way or the other. How do we navigate this effectively? So a little bit about me. So I started my career off working in venture capital, doing early stage investing into software companies all over the world. And I always wanted to start a company, went to business school, taught myself how to program, eventually started this company called Next Wave Hire, which is like recruitment marketing for SMBs, hired a guy to run that. And basically what I do today is I spend all day long researching HR technology, talking to vendors, VCs, analysts, practitioners, most importantly, and trying to figure out like what the hell is actually going on. And I'd write it up for people to read on my website so they can make better decisions. So I got into this because I think there are a lot of nefarious characters in the HR tech ecosystem, similar to our buddy Leo in Wolf of Wall Street. They're good salespeople. They seem super likable, but they're kind of aggressive. They're trying to like shove these penny stocks down your throat. For me personally, on the vendor side, I just learned that a lot of the like HR thought leaders out there are actually getting like kickbacks from people. Like when I was running this HR company, like basically like people would be like, hey, like give us $5,000 and we'll write this blog post about how you have this amazing technology. And I was like, oh, that's weird. Like you are just willing to sell yourself for 5K. And by the way, like every practitioner out there is going to read that and just be totally misled. The other sort of thing that I found to be really frustrating about this industry is that there's all these like Yelp for software websites out there, and I challenge you to type in like the worst piece of software you've ever used. Maybe it's Workday, maybe it's like pick your choice, other terrible HR technology, type it into one of these websites. I will buy you a drink if it doesn't have at least a 4.0 rating. And my guess is it probably has like a 4.6, 4.7, 4.8. They're all just like super gamed. And so HR tech's really hard to buy. I want to help everybody in this room be a little bit better, a little bit more successful as an individual, and help your business to get to that next level. So my goals tonight are basically to like demystify some of this stuff, to enlighten, to like take all the stuff that I've learned that I think is like the lowest hanging fruit, that's the most impactful that you can use tomorrow, and to arm everybody. I'm a competitive person, and I sort of see this stuff almost like going to war, right? Like you're going to war with your CFO to get budget. You're going to war with the vendor to make sure that you are getting the best price with your internal stakeholders, blah, blah, blah. I want everybody to have an arsenal when they walk out of here so you can do your job better, get that promotion. Okay, so this is probably like not super surprising. 68% of the time software fails. Has anybody in here like ever had a software implementation that didn't go well? Yep. Was it Workday? No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. This isn't going on the internet, right? So like it fails for many different reasons. First of all, it's like, wow, there are a lot of vendors out there. In North America, there are 75 HRIS vendors. That's crazy. If you've ever been to HR Tech in Vegas, HRIS is like one little corner of the trade show, right? Then there's like ATS, employee engagement, performance management, payroll, blah, 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 blah. There's a million different vendors out there. This is probably the most intimidating thing that I've seen, this slide, and it's a big reason why this stuff fails. I've felt like this little dog before. I don't know if anybody else out there has felt like this before. Man, budgeting, it's just unpleasant. You talk to a vendor and it's like buying a car. They're like, okay, the list price is 10K. I'm going to give it to you for 9,500. You guys are an amazing company. We want the logo. I like you. And you're like, man, I know the price isn't 9,500, right? But am I going to call this person a liar? Am I going to like go through sort of like expending the social capital to have this negotiation? And the answer sometimes is no. The answer should always be yes, right? Because like you can get it for 7,500 or whatever the case may be. The bottom line is it's just super, super unpleasant. And you're probably having similar conversations with your CFO, the people who hold the purse strings internally. It might be more of an adversarial thing where like there's just a history there. But nonetheless, you kind of start feeling like this dog, right? Implementation failures, this is like the worst. There's too much data. There's not enough customer success. We've all been there. Stakeholder management, you got, this guy, Lumpkert, being like, hey, it'd be great if you came in on a Saturday. And you're like, but dude, you like don't let me do anything in this company. And you just yell at me. And like we're this under-resourced, overworked unit that can add a lot of value. And you've never listened to me once. Does anybody have anybody like that in their organization? Some smiles, some laughs, yes. We all deal with these sorts of people, and they can kill stuff for us, right? We can spend so much time doing stuff, and they say no, or we spend so much time doing stuff, we buy something, and they screw it up. 18% of the time, we trust salespeople, 18% of the time, and I think that's probably about right. This guy is obviously like clearly a huge caricature with his cigarette and his thumbs up. But the bottom line is that you have basically the exact opposite incentive of a salesperson who you're essentially going to war with. They want to increase the price, you want to decrease the price. You want to look at other vendors, you want the right information. And one of the big difficulties here is that this person is one of your biggest conduits to getting the right information, to making the right decisions. Okay, so that's all the bad stuff. That's like all the things that trip us up, that drive people crazy, that kind of inspire me to try to learn the best practices and then share them with people. The good news is that HR can do it. HR is kind of an amazing part of the organization that is always under-resourced. In every single company, it is under-resourced. It's overworked. You're dealing with everything from employee relations to talent acquisition, employee engagement. You can do all that stuff. You're being asked to do this other thing, which is like buy the right tools and technology, which kind of like isn't fair in a lot of ways. But as we'll see in a few slides, it's worth it. Because when we do, it's kind of amazing. Like McKinsey, HBR, Deloitte, they've all done studies. They've all done these like huge data analysis. And the end result is that when HR does its job really well, when the company trusts HR, when they get to that point, profits go up, revenue goes up. McKinsey found, I think on average, it's 2.75 percentage points increase in profits, which sounds like some like teeny tiny number, but it's actually kind of huge, especially if you work at a large company. So employees love it too, right? Have anybody ever done a new initiative here and employees just loved it? And like, how good does that make you feel? Most of us got into this industry because we like to help people. That's the bottom line. And when your employees love things, there's all this like good juju that goes on with your employer brand and referrals and like retention. But the bottom line also is like, it just makes you feel really good. Execs, even though they're stoic and they smoke their cigarettes and drink their scotch, they love it too. They are all about driving business outcomes, help them meet their goals, help the board feel good about the company. And when you help them do that, when you align with their incentives, magic happens. Business goes up. McKinsey study, 2.75% profit increase. Okay, so this is like how this actually plays out in reality. So I'm all about these like virtuous circle things. I think this is like maybe the most powerful like business concept out there. The thing that I like to use to demonstrate how powerful it is like if you think about Amazon's business, like why is Amazon a $1 trillion company? It's because they have a ton of customers, which allows them to negotiate with their suppliers, decrease pricing, which means that more people buy stuff from them, right? Because they have really low prices, which allows them to further negotiate with their suppliers and further decrease prices and get more customers, and on and on and on until Jeff Bezos is a billionaire. So HR can actually take advantage of a similar dynamic within the organization, which is if you're able to do all the stuff that I'm going to talk about to buy the right technology, you're going to have amazing outcomes. You're going to solve the diversity problems. You're going to hire all those engineers that the CTO is on your back about, blah, blah, blah. You're going to have good outcomes, and then you're going to evangelize it in the organization. You're going to say, hey, remember we updated our career website? Well, here's what actually ended up happening from that. We were able to increase the amount of quality applicants, which decreased our time to fill, which allowed us to open up that new call center faster. And that recognition that you sort of evangelize leads to more resources. It leads to more clout in the organization. We all know people in our organizations that have the clout, that do the stuff that they want to do. And of course, this allows us to do stuff like buy more technology. You could substitute technology for tools, for initiatives. Basically, it's the stuff that you feel passionate about to make the culture better, to hire the right people, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so of course, the robots are coming. We have to talk about AI. Otherwise, this isn't a talk about HR tech. I think everybody's like really afraid of what's going on with artificial intelligence. And AI is certainly changing the world. So this is a photo of Kandahar in Afghanistan, like one of the most violent places in the world for a very, very long time. The US military is using artificial intelligence to look at thousands of these sorts of photos and understand where nefarious activity might be happening. What might be a radar installation? What might be somebody that shouldn't be in a certain place? A human takes a really long time to look at something like this, and this changes every hour. And so AI can do a much better job of understanding this stuff and flagging things for an actual human being to go in and look at. And so AI is like changing the world really, really quickly. But the crazy thing is that this whole like AI thing, it's actually been around for a really long time. Google is artificial intelligence, right? Like it builds this creepy psychographic profile on you, and it knows that you've been researching a vacation in Cancun. And so that when you type in Mexico, the autofill is like, Mexico, Cancun hotels, click here, make us ads, ad revenue, right? This is AI. Resume parsing is AI. And it started off with keyword matching, and then the AI got better at understanding how the keywords interrelate and therefore how things should be matched to one another. If there's any like real hardcore like tech nerds in the audience, you're probably like, that's not AI. And it's like, yeah, you're right. Like AI is actually not going to happen for another like 50 plus years. Like maybe, we'll see. There's some scary stuff with AI. This is like a map that I think about when I'm feeling like really anxious. It's the #1 job in every state in America. And you can see that vast majority of states, the #1 job is truck driver. There's like 3 million people in the United States who are truck drivers. And there are lots of people who build their livelihoods around supporting truck drivers. There's people that have rest stops and hotels and all these other things. And we might not be that far away from having self-driving trucks. You think about like Tesla Autopilot, it's basically the technology already exists. And so there are things that AI is going to change, and maybe change for the worse, and that we actually have to think about. It's definitely going to change HR. So, resume parsing, been around for a really long time. Now we're using artificial intelligence to screen candidates, to answer questions to prospective and current employees. We're doing it to rediscover people in our ATS. There's really cool technology that basically looks at our open recs and says, okay, this rec, we actually have like 6 past candidates that would be phenomenal for this that applied in the last, 3 months, and they got dinged for the right reasons because there wasn't a good fit at the time. And by the way, like they all just updated their LinkedIn profiles, and therefore they're still in the job market. We should reach out to those people. That's something that a human being probably isn't going to do. It would take a really long time, but an algorithm can do it in like 2 seconds. However, humans are still needed. Does anybody read in the news recently about the Apple credit card? and it like wasn't giving the same limits to women. Like two people, like spouses, would like apply for the credit card, and like the woman, even if they had a better credit score, even if they had higher income, would get a lower credit limit. Pretty crazy stuff. How does that happen? Because the people building these things many times are like very biased themselves. There's a tech assessment platform that I just talked to. Tech assessment's like you send somebody this coding thing and they do like some Python exercise, and they found that women were doing really badly on their tests. And they were like, wow, that's so weird. And then they realized that, oh wait, this has been built by men. And so they actually actively hired a couple of female product managers, changed the product, and of course, the results stabilized. So this stuff is like happening. It's many ways our new exoskeleton. You know, just like software allows us to be like better, cheaper, faster. AI is sort of the next generation of that. But don't worry, like we're all going to be gainfully employed for a very, very long time. Okay, so let's say like you buy into this whole HR tech thing. Like, yeah, I need HR tech. You're remembering that slide with like 9,000 vendors. There's 75 HRISs in North America alone. Where do I actually focus? Here are a couple frameworks that I recommend. The first is to think about your employee lifecycle. So everything from like the employer branding stuff, like when people actually start to learn about us, like career website, Glassdoor, blah, 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 into applying, into screening, into onboarding, into becoming an employee, into referring people, into engaging, into becoming alumni that still support the company. I think that's like an okay way of looking at this stuff. I think the much better way for HR to think about what to prioritize is the business. So again, this gets back to that virtuous cycle. Nobody cares about HR if your outcome doesn't relate to the business. If you go to the CFO and you're like, hey, everybody loves the snacks, they're like, oh, okay, cool. If you're like, hey, we did this thing that like increases retention in our call center by 17%, and that means we have to hire 150 less people per year, and our cost per hire is X, and therefore we save Y, and that allowed us to land that new account, they're like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Like, that's how I get compensated. That's how I get my bonus. That's how I'm eventually going to build my resume and like go do stuff. That's what the board cares about. And so I challenge everybody in this room to think about what are the things that the board cares about? What are the things that the C-level cares about? And how do people relate to those things? And how can I solve those problems through initiatives that I can measure, that I can evangelize, I can get recognition for, that I can get the resources for? Okay, so let's say you're like, hey, everybody's really obsessed with this whole retention thing. We're gonna go out and try to solve this. You're gonna talk to a lot of vendors. This is sort of the part of the presentation where I try to give like my pro tips, my like quick hits, so everybody has at least something that they can take away from this. The whole thing here is that when you talk to these things, at least for me, like I tend to let my emotions come out. And it becomes more of this like, you know, I look into the cat's eyes and I'm like, oh, that's a really cute cat that obviously needs a home. You know, maybe I should just buy this piece of software. You know, the salesperson seems like they really need to hit quota this quarter. Turns out that's not the best way to pick software. The best way is to be amazingly objective, have a spreadsheet, and be like, here are my 9 criteria. Do you satisfy these? How well do you satisfy these? What's your pricing model? How does it stack up to the 3 other vendors I'm looking at? And how do I feel about you as a salesperson? I think this is something that's underrated. The best salespeople can work anywhere. They work at companies with amazing products because that allows them to hit quota at higher rates and make more money. And so if you have a great salesperson that's talking to you, that means there's a really high chance that there's a great product behind it as well. Here's another pro tip. The wisdom of the crowd is not wisdom at all. I kind of mentioned this before. Like, go to any of these Yelp for software websites, type in your worst software that you've ever used or demoed. It'll have an amazing rating. I think the other thing is that we rely so much on the wisdom of the people in our network. And I know a lot of smart people in my network who've given me terrible advice because we're all so biased. Like maybe you bought something that's really, really good, but you had a bad experience for whatever reason, or vice versa. And so my suggestion is to try to get as much information as possible. The best tip that I can impart upon HR is to use these, what I call cross-functional buying committees. So I'll tell you a quick story. There was a woman that I am friends with who wanted to buy a new performance management system. She didn't have the juice to get it done. Like, just quite frankly, like, nobody was going to allow her to spend $40,000 on this thing. So she put it out on Slack. She's like, hey, I care about the culture here. Who else cares about the culture here? Turns out a lot of people. The gunners, basically, the rising stars from marketing, from sales, from engineering. So she built this like nice little committee of like 6 or 7 people. And she's like, okay, we're going to get together and we're going to brainstorm how do we increase the culture quotient here. And they brainstormed a bunch of stuff, and they basically decided that, yeah, performance management, a new performance management system was actually a really good way for them to attack this problem. She went off, she did the research, she was very objective, she had her spreadsheet. She came back to that committee and she was like, hey, I want to move forward with this vendor. They were like, sweet, sounds good. The CFO was like, no, you're not going to get the $40,000. Like, it's just not going to happen. And so the director of marketing, who was part of this cross-functional buying committee, and the VP of engineering, who was part of this cross-functional buying committee, went to the CFO and were like, hey, we're all on board for this. Like, we're sort of like the gunners of the organization, right? And like, we all think this is an amazing thing, and we're all going to stand behind it. And so, boom, she got the budget. And then when it came to implementation, because so many times HR tech relies on the rest of the organization to adopt it, she wasn't like sending these emails to people that have never heard of her. She was having the head of engineering or the director of marketing send the communication to the rest of the employees being like, hey, we're doing this performance management thing. Here's why. Here's how it's going to impact your job. Here's how it's going to impact the culture. Here's why it's important. And it was a huge success. Okay, so let's get armed. Hopefully I've communicated a couple of pro tips here and there. I think like the number one thing that I see people struggle with is how do you like weaponize ROI? This was actually the photo that came up when I Googled weaponize ROI. It's like a tie interceptor with a bird in it. Literally no idea what this means or who put this together, but I should probably source them. Actually, I probably shouldn't say I don't know who put it together. So what does this mean? Like, again, this is like, how does this impact the business? We did this thing. We increased the conversion rate on the career site by talking about our employee value propositions. That decreased time to fill in the call center. That allowed us to increase revenue by 4%. Isn't that sweet? And by the way, our business is valued at 3 times revenue, so it's not just that we got another $400,000 of revenue. The business actually increased the enterprise value by $1.6 million. If you are really good at this, you will never be told again no by the CFO. Like, it's just not going to happen, which is kind of crazy. Like, all you need to do is take what you're doing and relate it to the business. And I would almost say that if what you're doing doesn't relate to the business, it's probably not worth doing. The pro tip here is that 6 months after you implement something, go back to your Excel model, go back to your original thesis, and find out where you were right and where you were wrong. Evangelize all of that, because you want to be seen as like this rational business leader, and then learn from it. Learn from where you overestimated, where you underestimated. Everybody always asks me, hey, Phil, like, you look at HR tech all day long. What are the most interesting places of HR tech? I think there are like actually very few places that are like changing dramatically, but for me, performance management, it's not just like some terrible module in your HRIS anymore. It's actually like this crazy operating system of your organization that allows individuals, board members, et cetera, to just like understand everything. People analytics, why are some women breaking through the glass ceiling and others aren't? What are the networks that they have? Why is this salesperson doing really well? Oh, it's because they have a really good relationship with people in customer service and marketing. This one sucks because they don't respond to emails and they don't have any relationships in the organization. Stuff's really cool. And of course, where the money is, talent acquisition, tons of stuff's happening, chatbots, AI sourcing, et cetera. I get it, it's overwhelming. I remember like the first 10 times somebody told me what Twitter was, I was just like, this is brain damage. Like, it's like an away message, but it's not. Like, it's so confusing. However, I strongly feel that, this is a long quote, I'll just summarize it for you, that like lifelong learning is like sort of the key to success. So Charlie Munger is Warren Buffett's right-hand man. He's the second in command at Berkshire Hathaway. And those two guys, like if you ask them what their key to success is, it's because they never stop learning. Every single month, they're trying to get 1% smarter by reading, by talking to people, by going to events, by networking. And so I think if it's good enough for Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, it's good enough for me. Of course, the negative, fearful way of looking at this is that if you don't change, you're going to become a dinosaur. And because I don't want to leave you on a negative note, I'll lead you with this Dr. Seuss quote: the more you read, the more you'll know. The more you learn, the more places you will go. Thank you guys so much.